check. Hello and welcome to the first of 5 one-day Zwift races promoted by Cycling Ireland. And for those of you familiar with Cycling Ireland online league racing, we'll get set for something a little special this morning. We're on the Greater London circuit with around about 40 kilometres of racing and a total of just 135 metres of climbing over the 3 laps. And what makes this morning's fair a little different is that it's a handicap race. Hare and Hound, competitor-paced, Australian handicap, call it what you will. It's basically Group D starting first, followed by Group C, Group B, and finally the Group A stars will have it all to do to get into position to win. Well, I'm joined once again by Ronan McLaughlin of cyclingtips.com to call the action today. And Ronan, it's a format that you've championed in the past, and it's one that gives every rider a realistic chance at glory.
Thanks, Declan. Yeah, and it's a format that, as you just pointed out, has many names. Perhaps going forward from here, will we just call it a chase race for the purposes of the Cycling Ireland Zwift League? And yeah, it's a new format to the racing here, and it's certainly going to spice things up a bit. It means that those riders who've been competing against each other week in, week out for across both the Cycling Ireland Zwift leagues will now have to become sort of teammates in a sense, and have to work together to try and either stay away from the group chasing them behind or work together to try to catch those groups that have started in front of them. And that's certainly going to bring a new dynamic to the racing. And it just means that, nothing's guaranteed. Every group's going to have to give their maximum to try and make it to that finish line as quickly as possible. And we could find scenarios where, where we have D group riders winning the overall race, or we could have the A group sprinting against the Bs and the Cs just as we come to the finish line, and that's going to make for some really exciting action.
Yeah, we're not sure how it's going to work out until we get to and we do need that cooperation between the groups before you get to the end game, when all bets are off and riders start to race for their own interests. Well, one man who knows all about the glory of victory is the legend that is Sean Kelly. Well, the Waterford man has been forced to focus all his riding efforts on the indoor trainer after a nasty crash before Christmas. He's on the mend now, as he told me when we caught up with him during the week.
So I had a bit of a fall mountain biking with a number of guys, quite heavy fall actually. Came down on my left side, broke left collarbone and 5 ribs, and was concussed for a bit. So yeah, it was quite a big one. I had many ones during my career, of course, where I did the collarbone and a finger and things, but never as many with 5 ribs. It was very painful for the first week, 10 days.
Really, and you're on the comeback trail now. I see you online. You're riding indoors. You've joined the Zwift revolution. You're a turbo rider. I presume you were always someone who liked to get outdoors, whether on road or off road with the mountain bike. Had you embraced the turbo training before, or is this a new thing for you?
Well, Declan, that's exactly right. I was never a guy for indoors on the turbo trainer back in the day. I prefer to get out, but I suppose. Yeah, with my injuries and as you get older as well, maybe the cold and that you don't support it as well. So I've been doing a lot more on the indoor trainer, the Zwift and all of that. It's been great to have that now because it's helped me to build my form back up again.
And you have your new, tell me about it, indoor velo screen mount, which you're promoting at the moment. It's an innovation, and it's coming at a good time, I would have thought, with everybody. So many of us are indoors and on our trainer.
Well, that's something that's been in the pipeline for quite a while. There's a guy, Stephen Fowle, who's a design engineer, and Barry Meehan, who I've been working with. So we've looked at that. It must be a year and a half ago at least, and we looked at it and we said we'd have a look at it again. So in lockdown, we had more time, and I had more time in my hands. So we started, working back and forth and improving it all the time, and put it on the bike, having a look at it, what can we do to improve it, all of that stuff. And now we have the end product, I think, which is quite good. So it's something where you can put your phone and your computer on, and you have it all at your fingertips. So it's something that it's very convenient. And nowadays there's so many people training indoors all over the world, but here in Ireland also, I think it's getting more and more popular. This Zwift racing, well, I think it's something it's going to be a part of cycling in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've all pivoted, embraced the new realities, call it what you will. It's been a tough time. How have you got through the lockdown in general? How have you enjoying it? Are you getting through it? Is it tough for you?
Well, the first lockdown back in March last year, that was pretty easy because we had really great weather for many months here. So you could ride around in laps, 7 or 8 or 10 kilo lap, whatever it would be, to stay in pretty much in your zone. And I was enjoying that. It was like going back to Belgium and riding KMS races on an 8 kilometer lap without having the carnival going through the town centre, the smell of frites and mayonnaise and burgers and all of that. So it was without all of that, but I enjoyed it, and I think I did more miles last year than I ever done in the past number of years, because having all that time on my hands, good weather. So I was in excellent form at the end of the year.
Well, Sean's your old team boss, Ronan. I feel sure that he'd certainly approve of the format of today's racing. It means everyone has to sort of race flat out throughout, and it's a fairly flat course this morning. Who's that going to suit?
Yeah, certainly. Sean had us doing the training drills on camps in the past with a similar format. He split the team into groups and have us chase each other up and down the roads of eastern Spain. So yeah, it's certainly something that he's well accustomed to. And in terms of who it'll suit today, it's sort of one of those races that given the dynamic of the chase. The chase race and the fact that it's so flat, it is sort of open to almost any rider. Obviously, it'll suit those who are a bit more powerful on the flats and perhaps have a sprint to finish it off at the end. But because it's going to be such unrelenting high pace and everybody's going to have to make a maximum effort from start to finish, it sort of comes back to just suiting someone who has a good aerobic engine, someone who is quite fit at the moment and can sustain that pace for a longer time. And it could come down to a situation at the finish where we see just the rider who has the most left in their legs wins the sprint, rather than the rider who is normally known as being the best sprinter. So yeah, quite open racing today, and it'll be interesting just to see can the A group, who have obviously had the most of the camera action so far in the Zwift League, can they catch the front group, or are we ever going to see them today? They'll certainly have their work cut out to close this gap.
They've all got their work cut out, aren't they? And we're set to go now. The riders are assembling at the start line. They're putting the finishing touches to warm-up routines. Well, I wonder who's been tempted into action this morning. Let's find out. And there are the riders assembling on the start line, ready to get going. And they're, of course, Group D. So it's all reversed. And this is the opportunity for these riders to shine, because they've got fully 6 minutes before the next group starts. These are the Group D riders who will be very shortly getting underway. Just 20 seconds to go. So they'll be revving it up on their power meters, or on their turbos, I should say, just trying to get those watts up to the absolute maximum. But of course, we've got a situation here where the riders are going to have to ride together to maintain their advantage and try and hold what they can all the way through to the finish. 6 minutes between themselves and Group C, who'll be next into action as we're underway in this first of the Cycling Ireland Zwift Classics. And let's have a look at some of the names who've been tempted into action today as we scroll through the list of D riders that have entered the event today. Not sure which ones have actually made it onto the line, but McSorley's there, Murphy, and Kenny as well. Siobhan Kelly is a rider who's entered the event. We'll see whether she's made an appearance. Rachel McLaughlin, no relation of anyone part of the commentary team here, but she's one of the riders who's also entered this event. She actually made it onto the start line. The women are racing in their category, in their group, based on watts per kilo. So women also in with a shout and racing in amongst the men today. This is a format, a style of racing that's very, very familiar to anyone who races as a member of a club in Cycling Ireland League events up and down the country throughout the season, from March through till September, October. This is the kind of thing that happens every Thursday evening all around the country, Ron.
It certainly is, yeah. Anybody who's ever done a club race will be quite familiar with the system here, and that the groups go off in intervals, and as you said, the gap to the next group today is 6 minutes between the D's and the C's, and then there's another gap between the C's and B's and B's and A's and so on. And it's certainly going to make for some exciting racing today. But I think the real benefit of this system is evident immediately here, and that we're getting to see riders race who we haven't had the chance to watch so far through the Zwift League, and I think that's fantastically exciting. And it just gives us a glimpse into the racing action that's going on in these groups. It's no different to the A group or the women's group that we get to watch on a weekly basis. We can see here straight out of the traps, as soon as the gun goes, the action has been hot from the start, and that's the same across all the groups. And I'm hoping that today's race gives us a glimpse into the sort of racing action across all the categories.
Yeah, well, there's plenty of what's been laid out there, despite the fact that this might be seen as being the group with the least ability in terms of watts per kilo. There's still a fair bit of effort being put into those pedals, and these riders are very fit, strong, skilled and experienced. We've got plenty of visiting riders that have joined us in this event. Thierry Hess is leading the group at the moment. Katie Devon is the leading Irish rider, and she's well to the fore, staying up there towards the front. 2.5 watts per kilo, still a fairly impressive effort going into the pedals there. David O'Rourke, Thomas Korzeniak is a Polish rider racing on a Cycling Ireland licence. Brian Laguerre. Let's get a few other names. Owen Marr has been tempted into action today. Lisa Banahan. Plenty of women involved in this group, including Berdine Driscoll, who was the top-ranked rider amongst the Ds, amongst the women category in the recently completed Cycling Ireland Zwift League, the winter edition of that. Berdine Driscoll getting the nod ahead of Siobhan Kelly on that occasion. She's scored 700 points, which is pretty much a maximum score from her 8 events, 7 to count. And amongst the C's, Andrea Lyons getting the win from Louise Mulvaney and Christine Neville. Those are the top-ranked riders amongst the C's in the recently completed Cycling Ireland Zwift League. Michelle McKinney and Katrina Davis, Virginia Heynen, that was the top 3 amongst the B's. And of course, Heather Foley took the A category honours ahead of Linda Kelly and Claire Richardson. Heather Foley is racing in the B group, which will be underway in about 6 minutes time, maybe that 5 minutes time before we see the B group into action. Before that, we're going to see the C's, and the C's are starting to rev it up about 2 minutes before the next group gets underway and gets into action. And this group, Ronan, seems to be working well together. We've got a group of around about 20 odd riders. Let me have a look at I think it's showing about 21 riders that are riding together, and well, they need to ride together.
Yeah, certainly. This is the group's opportunity now to get a bit of cooperation going in the group, and it does seem that quite a few riders here are taking an equal pull on the front. We can see them sort of coming through and off here at the front and keeping the pace high. And as we see the clock ticking here at the top, it's now 4 minutes into their race, so it's very very soon now that we'll see the C category riders starting and hopefully from their point of view start eating into this 6 minute lead that the D's have. So it is a great advantage that they've been set off with, and it's up to the D group now to make the most of it and work together to make that gap last as long as they can effectively.
Yeah, these gaps, of course, established and worked out based on the finishing times and positions of the best of the riders in each of the groups through the Cycling Ireland Zwift League. There's a committee, the Handicap Committee of the Cycling Ireland Zwift League has met and sat on the thing.
Thankfully, neither you nor I are part of.
Not at all. No, nothing to do with it. I understand they've been toiling long into the night, burning the midnight oil, and much calculation and recrimination, and lots of rows and shouting and screaming, and eventually they came up with these handicaps. So if you got any problems, do contact the Cycling Ireland Handicap Committee at cyclingireland.ie. That doesn't exist, that, by the way. But
for
okay, we're pretty close
to this form of racing. They will know from club racing that some weeks it works out in your favour, some weeks it goes against you, but over the course of a league it ends up sort of averaging out that everybody gets a decent opportunity on some week at least.
So the C group should be into action now. 6 minutes into this race, and we believe the next group will be on the road on what is the flattest circuit in the entire Zwift compendium of routes that are available. As we pick up the riders just heading underway amongst the C group. So these riders 6 minutes in arrears, but with an advantage of fully 4 minutes over the final riders that will get into action today. They're the A riders waiting anxiously, starting to chomp at the bit a little bit and shouting at the starters, saying, "Come on, Chewie, let us underway. We'll get going." But the B riders are pushing hard now to try and close down that gap of 6 minutes. They've got 3 minutes to the B group next to get underway, and of course it's a slightly changed scenario for them because they've got to work together to chase the riders in front and then try and hold off the riders behind.
Yeah, that's so far across all the Zwift racing that we've seen, they've been competing against each other and been best of enemies, so to speak, and just concentrating on how to outdo their rivals. Whereas today, each of these, across all the groups, the riders have to actually work together for their own benefit, and that certainly makes it for some interesting tactics. You will always have those who try to sit back and maybe do a bit less than some other riders in the group, but certainly it's in the interest of everybody in the opening phases of the race that they work together well and either keeping a group chasing them behind or for the groups that are setting off last, that they have at least an opportunity to catch the groups in front of them as we come on towards the finish.
B group now chasing the D group that are out front in this first of the Cycling Ireland classic events. We've got 5 weeks of these. Then we're back into more league activity, but these one-day races I think are going to attract a lot of attention, particularly this Australian Handicap chase events. They're chase events, so that's what we're going to continue to call them from now on. There are so many different ways to describe this style of racing, and that's because it's particularly popular, and some of the names to conjure with amongst this C group, well, I pick out Derek Cunningham from Bray Wheelers. He's a fine rider, likes to do a bit of track racing in his time, so he'll be pretty familiar with this style of racing. And Derek is a Ross rider in the past as well. He entered the event, not 100% sure that he's actually into action today, but I believe he'll be somewhere in that group. So not too long now before we see the appearance of the B group. There are about 15 seconds to go before the Bs head into action. They're winding up on their turbo, and the B group will be next. Owen Lattimore is amongst those riders in that C group as we look at those. Let's see if we can pick up on the Bs about to depart. And here we go. We are indeed up and into action. Notable there that Heather Foley, the top woman from the Cycling Ireland Zwift League, is entered in amongst the B group riders today, and she'll certainly be one to watch out for. Her partner, Desi Foley, indeed, is actually in the A group waiting to depart. There's only a minute now between this group and the last of the racers into action today. Stephen McNally, former European Masters Pursuit champion, is also amongst this B group today to see what he can do. And Greg Callahan, I see, is also a notable entrant in this event. Has Greg made it onto the start line this morning? He certainly entered it last night, and the world star of enduro racing on his mountain bikes, also pretty useful on the turbo in Zwift racing, and he's one to watch out for amongst the Bs. Just a single minute advantage, I think, shows you just what strength and depth we have at this level of racing. Here we're underway, and the final riders into action, so everybody is out racing in the Cycling Ireland Zwift Classic, the first of these races. Let's see who's going to be charging towards the front. Well, Stuart Henry and Richard Barry are amongst the names to pick out. Richard Barry, of course, second in the Cycling Ireland Zwift League recently, with at least one victory along the way for the Blarney man, and he's straight to the front of that group, trying to push on to close down that deficit of fully 10 minutes.
Yeah, and that's what the group has to do, and the rest of the riders in this group, they can't rely solely on Richard Barry or a small number of riders to make up this deficit. They have to work well together here and try to close this gap. Not necessarily as quick as they can, but ideally they don't want to be catching the lead riders within the last few kilometers of the race. Ideally, they want to sort of try to pick their way through the groups as smoothly as possible and give themselves time on the last lap to actually duke it out for the win, if indeed they can catch these leading groups.
Lots of riders still involved up front. I can tell you Michael Garland is a Scottish rider who's setting the tempo on the front of the D group. This is the A group, which started 10 minutes behind the rest. We've got 3 full laps of this London Flat circuit. 11.6 kilometres is the length of what is effectively billiard table smooth. There are a couple of little lumps along the way, but nothing that's of any great significance. 5.7 kilometre lead in to start the lap, so it's all going to add up to just over 40 kilometres, around about 40.5, 40.7 kilometres of racing this morning for the riders. It's a relatively long Zwift race, albeit a very flat one.
Yeah, certainly it's one of the longest that we've had in the Cycling Ireland series, and the fact that it is flat means that they will cover it relatively quickly. So in terms of duration, it'll probably not be much longer than what we used to see in here. But I think the added distance here today just does give that extra opportunity for the group starting, last here to make up that disadvantage that they have on the start line.
No sign of Matteo Cigala, who won the Cycling Ireland Zwift League, the recently completed league. The Team Down Morrissey McCarthy Insurance Pactimo rider, the Italian rider, is not, as far as we understand, present in this group. But Richard Barry certainly is, so an opportunity for him to take that elusive win, and he's clearly in top form as he pushes hard in the event. Yeah, Cigala not in this event this morning, but Richard Barry certainly is, as these riders try to do something about pushing on and trying to close down that gap. I wonder what's happening up front among the leading riders. Perhaps we can get back towards the front of the race and see how this group has it whittled down a little bit. I think just checking and calculating on the numbers, we're showing at around about 16 riders up front. So 1 or 2 riders have been jettisoned since that really intense beginning to the race. Among the names, David O'Rourke is out racing today. Korzeniak is the Polish rider based in Ireland who's pressing on. Debbie van den Berg is a visiting rider from the Netherlands who's showing decent form today. David O'Rourke we've also already mentioned, Brian Laguerre, Kevin Mullen, Owen Marr, Antonio Gravello. Donald Fitzmaurice, Simon Murphy is leading the group behind. They're 13 seconds in arrears, but remember, they could conceivably be scooped up by the C group coming behind, and they'll hope that those that have been dropped can perhaps just recoup a little bit of energy, and now that things have settled down a bit, they might conceivably be able to be picked up by the group behind. That's what they'll be hoping for at any rate.
Yeah, certainly, and at a certain point, those riders who have been distanced by the leading riders will sort of have to make a decision, and are they better to keep working together and continue pushing hard to try and stay away, or are they better to take the opportunity to relax a bit, recover a bit, sort of give the legs a break, ease off the pedals a bit, and sort of allow those chasing groups to pick them up, in the hope then that, having had that sort of recovery period, that they'll be able to sit in those chasing groups and get sort of sucked along towards the finish line.
There's the B group, which is the third of 4 groups in action today. Greg Callahan among the names to pick out. Stephen Edmondson, who's been a star performer in league competition. Dylan Rafter, fine ACAT rider on the road in his day. He's won many top events, including the Gorey 3-day, I believe. Certainly up there at least 1 year. And he'll be a man to watch out for. A woman to watch out for is Heather Foley. She's safely nestling in this group of B riders, trying to hold off the A's behind, starting with that minute advantage, and the difference between the leading A rider and the leading B rider in recent league activity, just a minute at the conclusion of those events. So that just shows you just how close it is, and what fine athletes indeed there are in that B group. So they're certainly going to put it up to this group. This is the A group, the final group on the road. Last time we heard, by the way, there was 3.8 kilometers between the D group and the C group. The first and second groups on the road, 3.8 kilometers, but they are chasing it down. And the latest we've heard indeed as well is that there's just 800 meters between this final group on the road, the A's, and in pursuit of the B's. They're going to hoover up some of the B's now, but the leading B riders have an advantage of 800 meters and shrinking down to 600 meters, we're hearing, and these A's are really charging along.
They certainly are, yeah, and we can see them already starting to pick up some of the B riders who have been sort of jettisoned from that B group out in front, and certainly it appears here that the pace is very high. There's a lot of riders getting sort of distance from the B group and picked up from the A group, and not getting much of a chance to jump in there. An unlucky few seem to be caught just on that drag, and that's a very difficult moment then to try and lift your speed to match that of a fast chasing group.
So the A's are starting to pick up some of the Bs. They might get a little bit of an advantage, a little bit of an aero advantage as they pick up rider after rider. So we focus, have a look on the front of the race now very shortly. Try and pick up some of the names that are pressing on. Christophe Olgeniak, tough, it's easy for you to say. Michael Garland, Larry Perras is a Canadian visiting rider. Brian Laguerre is the leading Irish rider amongst those that group up front. David O'Rourke also pressing on with great facility. So 11.5 kilometers completed for our leading riders. You can see they've got over 5 kilometers on the final group on the road, but quite a difference in pace between those. This is the D group. These are the leaders of the race right now.
Yeah, and interestingly, we're saying there about potentially a bit of a slipstream effect from catching riders in front, but actually one of the sort of peculiar things about racing on Zwift is sometimes when you're catching a rider moving a bit slower than you in front of you, you can sort of get stuck into their slipstream, and instead of getting the benefit off it actually can cost you a bit of speed, and in doing so you then have to re-accelerate and get back up to the speed that you're at. So it might not work as much in their favour as we would see on the road. So it'll be interesting just to see or hear from the riders afterwards if they did find that was actually hampering them in their chase rather than sort of assisting them.
I think it's fairly certain that's what they'll say. One way or another, yeah.
It depends on whether they catch them or not, doesn't it?
I suppose. And is the catch going to be made? A long way to go before we find that out. Huge advantage really for the leading D riders, and they've got to try and make the most of it as they press on. And Katie Devon is the leading woman competitor at the moment. She's got significant advantage. We pick up some of the riders in pursuit behind. Vinny O'Leary is a rider that we've heard quite a bit of over the weeks, and he has indeed performed with great distinction in the Cycling Ireland Zwift League. And the A's, we understand, are now about to pick up the leading A riders are going to pick up the leading Bs, as Richard Barry's well to the fore, and among that group of riders that are just started scooping up the leading Bs. So the leading Bs didn't last out there for very long indeed, and that just shows you it's about getting going quickly, and the just sheer volume of watts that can be recruited by those A riders. They might not necessarily be able to sustain it, but they can recover, go again, and it's just that 1 minute power, that 3 minute power is on a different level.
Yeah, certainly, and there's, as you mentioned earlier, with the course being so flat, one of the difficulties with that in this sort of chase race is that the speeds are going to be so incredibly high. We can see here now 50 kilometers per hour at the moment for this group, and with the speeds being so high, it does make the differences between groups much more difficult to close the gaps. And had we seen a big climb on each of the laps here, you could see the A group take huge chunks of time out of the groups that they're chasing on the climb. But with the course being so flat, it's almost doubly impressive how quickly they are coming up on the B group here. And I certainly didn't expect the junction to be made quite as quick as we might see here, and that's a testament to how well the A group must be working together.
Very impressive. Greg Callahan is amongst those riders that have just been joined by the leading A competitors. He is a professional racing cyclist and he is world championship level. He's competed in the Enduro World Series for many years with great distinction, competing indeed, won several events. And Greg Callahan is quite an athlete, and he's amongst that larger group now of Bs and As. It'll be interesting to see how many of those Bs will be able to stay with the As, having had that 1 minute advantage, time to settle in and get control of their breathing and their watts output, and now will they be able to settle into that group?
Well, yeah, that's a very interesting question. Perhaps the A's have caught the Bs so quickly because the strongest of that B group have decided that they're going to use the opening phase of the race just to save their legs, keep their powder dry, wait for the A's to catch them, and then perhaps be able to match them. Because, as you mentioned earlier, you know, there only was a minute between the fastest A and the fastest Bs and across the last few rounds of the Cycling Ireland Zwift League. So, you know, we're not talking about a huge gap in terms of ability level here, and perhaps that, you know, the opening 10 kilometers or opening 10 minutes or so of taking it that a little bit easier could be that minute's worth of difference on the finish line today.
Yeah, no, the A's actually haven't quite got there, so I got my wires crossed there a little bit, but we're just getting the update, the information that there's still, I mean, a good 500 metres between them. So the Bs are really working well. It was, 800 metres down to 600 metres, and then it's kind of stabilised a little bit. So it's taking time for the A's to get themselves organised enough to get on terms with the Bs. Bs have got themselves going.
Yeah, but, you know, at these speeds as well, 500 metres doesn't take very long to cover, just over 30 seconds. So the gap is certainly much reduced compared to what we've seen on the start line.
Okay, fair to say, yeah, indeed. At this rate of progress across the virtual tarmac, they quite a kilometre per minute, but it's 45, 50 kilometres an hour as we look at the A group on the road. Plenty of visiting riders in there as well who are assisting the chase behind. O'Leary, Cunningham, Barry we've seen as well, Kavanagh. Those are the significant names. Casey as well from the Irish cohort. Buckley also pressing on in their efforts to get on terms. 10 kilometres completed front. Let's see if we can pick up on what's happening among the leading riders up front, who's pressing on to try and stay at front. Significant contrast in the pace across the virtual tarmac there between the D group up front, but it is a little bit of a drag here. It's not a hilly circuit by any means, but just a little bit of a drag is just pulling the pace out of that leading group, and that group is somewhat reduced as well. You're looking at the leaders. This is the D group, which is starting to split up and fracture, and that won't necessarily suit them absolutely perfect. As we understand at the moment, there are now 5 kilometers between the front of the race and the A group behind. This is Olejniak. Now we're going to have another go at that. Olejniak. No, I haven't a clue. So apologies to Christoph, the Polish rider, who's doing an absolutely superb job today, leading this race in the company of Debbie van den Berg, our Dutch visitor. Tomasz Korzeniak is another Polish rider. He racing with the Irish affiliation, Cycling Ireland Zwift League affiliation. Birkir Ingvason is an Icelandic rider who's decided to join the fight today and to see what they can do about holding off the C's, the B's and the A's behind. And other names in there, Dennis Vachtel is a Czech rider, Robert Waters from the United States of America, Kevin Mullen from Scotland, Larry Paris, we've mentioned, is a Canadian rider, Mirko Capobasso from Italy. We've got one or two Spanish riders in there as well, and of course plenty of Irish. Brian Laguerre, Katie Devon also nestling in the group, but it's actually split up a little bit, and it looks to me as if we only have indeed one Irish rider amongst two. We've got Owen Marr as well. 24 kilometres to go for our leaders out front, who have an advantage of 5 kilometres and dwindling between themselves and the leading A riders behind. But suffice it to say, there are lots and lots of riders in between, and those A's are really charging along. Some more updated information. The D group now 5 kilometres in front of the A. The C's are 2.1 kilometres behind and charging. Quite a way to go, and plenty of time for them to get on terms.
Yeah, certainly plenty of time. You know, we're just under halfway through this race, so still plenty of time for those groups to make the catch here. And I suppose it depends on which group you're in, what way you might look at that. For the D group out front, they'll be certainly counting down the kilometres as quickly as they can, whereas for the A's and B's and C's chasing, they might not be so eager to see the finish line. Their biggest fear might be running out of road in this chase and not making the catch before the finish.
Quick reminder, by the way, we saw a terrific excerpt of an interview that we did with Sean Kelly a couple of days ago. So the former world number one gave us an extended chat and some insight into his expectations for the year for our leading World Tour contenders on the road. We're looking forward to a road season at some stage. And if you want to check out that video, it's going to be on Facebook, on the Cycling Ireland Facebook feed sometime this weekend. So do check out that. And no doubt Sean is tuned in this morning and watching with interest to see how these riders are getting on, whether Richard Barry and his friends in the A group are going to be able to get on terms. Last time we heard, and that's literally just about a minute ago, the leading A riders had about 300 meters to get on terms with the leading B riders. In turn, the Bs had just a kilometre to close to get on terms with the Cs. Now, there was just 1 minute between Bs and As starting today, whereas there were 3 minutes between the Cs and the Bs. So it's an impressive rate of progress by the B riders.
It certainly is, yeah. The A's and B's are really putting on a show here. I think the B's have certainly seemed to have got their cooperation going in this group, and they seem to be working much better together now than they might have been on the opening lap. And you know, although the gap is still coming down to the A's, it's not coming down quite as rapidly. And at the same time, we are seeing the B's catch the C's, which is quite impressive. We're seeing the whole race sort of gradually come together here, ever so slowly, and it's making for a sort of an exciting finale here.
It's going to be a bit of a chariot charge to the line, isn't it? We've got a lot of riders still involved behind. They're scooping, more and more numbers up as they sort of hoover the riders in front. And it is going to be interesting to see how many riders can stay in contention as those faster, stronger riders. In many ways, you're looking at a bunch race. In other ways, what you're looking at is a series of individual time trials that are taking place all over the world, not just in Ireland, and beyond. So it's how do riders manage to stay in the group, take advantage of the gameplay options and that aero advantage of staying in the slipstream of the riders in front. It's challenging stuff, even when you're going slowly. When you're going absolutely flat chat and your lungs are coming out through your eyeballs, it's complicated.
I think it's one of the best racing styles that we've seen yet. As you said, we've got individual time trials and bunch racing going on, but I think you can throw team time trials into that mix there as well, and that all the riders here are having to work together with riders they're normally competing against, and at the same time sort of sitting on that limit the whole way through. As we know, Zwift racing is hugely intense, and there's very little chance for recovery. So very much like a time trial, very much like a bunch race, but also quite like a team time trial, bizarrely so it is.
Brian Geary amongst those riders in the A group trying to chase down the Bs. They've got a bit of work to do. As they chase down those B riders, they're also trying to get on terms with Cs. So the Bs are less than a kilometre now behind the Cs, and the Bs have just left the tunnel, and you can see the As are in that tunnel. So it's not going to be terribly long before they're on terms with that rider. Stephen Evanson's a rider to conjure with. He's performed with great distinction in Cycling Ireland Zwift League competition. We just saw him among the riders that are scrolling through. Dylan Rafter I've already mentioned, Nolan Fagan, all top riders up front. I can tell you the leading D riders, mostly the visitors, but Thomas Korzeniak is the top Cycling Ireland registered rider. Owen Marr has also made the front group of D riders, which numbers just 15 at this point. Brian Laguerre is another rider as well. And Katie Devon, superb effort from Katie Devon to make that front group. 20.3 kilometres completed, so around about the halfway distance. Still a long way to go.
Yeah, certainly, and this effort's going to start catching up with the riders, as we said there in the pre-race show. With it being such a long race and so intense from start to finish, it might just be a case of who has the most left on the last lap, rather than who is the best sprinter or who's the strongest on paper. It's very much who has the form right now and who can sustain this level of intensity from start to finish.
Yeah, hoovering up more of the bees as they scroll through shot, and Richard Barry well to the fore. 16.5 kilometres completed for the A riders, so it doesn't take much mental arithmetic. I think it's easier to do the sums than it is to say the word, but suffice it to say. Yeah, well, I won't try and say it again, but suffice it to say there is something in the order of 4 kilometres between the front of the race and those leading A riders behind. Plenty of riders have been left in their wake by the B group and the A's, and indeed I'm sure there's a few C's that are starting to pepper the scrolling list of riders on the right hand side. They'll be hoovered up and dispensed with, dispatched to their own suffering and silence and relatively anonymous pain from now on through to the end. It's exactly 4 kilometres between the leading A group and the leading D group that heads this race at the moment, and the Bs are about to be closed down, but it's taking time just for these leading A riders to get on terms.
It certainly is, yeah, and all the time these groups are chasing each other. They are taking the big time out of the groups in front, but at the same time, the question has to be asked: would these two very strong groups be better coming together and working as one single unit, and all the riders profiting from it? Whereas at the moment, with the riders that are working on the front in both those groups, they're effectively hampering everybody's chances of catching that group in front or going for the win should they catch those groups. So at a certain point, it might come where the Bs have to make the decision that they would be better off recovering a little bit, letting the A's catch them, and then try to put the pressure onto the A's to do the most of the work.
You're looking at the leading B riders still holding off the A's behind. It's going to clean up a little bit in between this B and A group, as those riders who've been dropped from the Bs are no longer. That they've already been caught by the A's, so there's not too many riders in between, so it's just going to be a classic pursuit and a private pursuit really between B and A at the moment, as we pick out Fagan among those riders. Ken O'Neill as well. I also saw the Orwell Wheelers rider in amongst those leading B riders, and pressing on for glory this morning. 18.6 kilometres completed. This is the leading A group, who have picked up one or two riders along the way, and they're hanging on grimly to try and stay in contention. Private pursuit as up front. The top riders in this event, the leading riders in this event, are of course still the D competitors, and they're down to what? Still got quite a bit to go in this race. We'll tell you in a little while. Jason Henry in amongst the leading A riders. Richard Barry there as well. Cunningham, Flannery. They're all performing well and working well together. And as you say, it's taken a long time through the hairpin here and back down the Mall, away from Buckingham Palace. And this is just an extra little loop that's put into this Greater London Flats circuit. This section of road will be familiar to anyone who watches the Greater London Classic.
And for any of the riders here whose eyeballs aren't hurting from the intensity of the effort, they might have noticed that you can actually, as you come up to these hairpins, there's a couple on the slab that they'll see the group that they're chasing going in the opposite direction, and they'll be using that as a reference. They'll be sort of judging where the chasing group is, watching the clock there on the centre right of our screen there, and working out how far behind they are.
Claire Richardson is performing very well indeed today. She is, we believe, possibly the leading rider amongst that B group. As we catch sight, albeit briefly, of that B group, Fagan in amongst them, and Claire Richardson among those riders in that B group, hanging on grimly and hanging on with impressive facility. I can tell you the A's and the B's are around about 1 kilometre behind the C's, so it's closing up, concertinaing nicely here. I wonder what the rate of progress is. There we go, Claire Richardson. You see her avatar is picked out on screen, nestling towards the back of that group, but all of these riders are working well together, riding in the slipstream. Then they make an effort. Plenty of power-ups in evidence as well as we look at the watts for Claire Richardson. Claire Richardson is Heather Foley's in there as well. 330 odd watts briefly for the Northern Irish rider. Her fellow Ulster woman Heather Foley, we believe, is also in this group. and pressing on for glory this morning. Ken O'Neill, I mentioned, Erwin, Walking Shaw, another Ulster rider, Crowley, Reimer, O'Murku, and plenty of visiting riders.
And it's interesting, the avatars are pretty emotionless here on screen. We don't get much of a sense of what the riders are going through at home, but certainly they're looking at Claire Richardson's output, 5.2 watts per kilo. I was seeing quite often there, that is a big effort to be making, especially 20 odd minutes into a race at this stage. And I'm sure for the riders at home who are having to put out these efforts, there's maybe a bit more emotion coming out than we perhaps see from the avatars on screen here.
Yeah, it's a pretty good poker face, isn't it, that their avatars pull, but God knows what level of agony and suffering is going on, all for our entertainment, and greatly entertained we are by this one. It's settled down, and we're in that little middle zone where it all looks like it's going swimmingly for the D competitors, but they can't afford to let up here, because we are going to see a sustained and relentless charge all the way to the line. And as I mentioned at the outset, it's a relatively long Zwift race. It'll be a very short road race, but it's a long sustained and very much an aerobic effort.
Yeah, certainly it's not like a normal Zwift race here where there might have been more opportunity to recover, both in terms of the style of racing, and that all the riders have to keep the watts up, keep the power going to try and chase the group in front of them, but also in terms of the course. We mentioned earlier that it's flat, and that certainly means that the speeds are high, but it also means that there's no descents to recover on, and that'll play its part as well in today's race, and just that little bit less of an opportunity to recover every lap.
So this is the B riders just hoovering up the back of the C competitors. So they've arrived onto what I'm not sure if there are any C's in front of this, but it's a fairly large and compact group of C competitors that have been visited by the B's. They'll race up the outside, and the C's will try and tag on behind.
Yeah, it was a big... two big groups coming together there, and those groups will now hopefully be able to contribute to the pulling on the front, and a bigger, stronger group like this, you would imagine, should be able to travel a bit faster than two separate groups working independently. So we'll just see now if these groups can get organised as they pick each other up, and if that makes any difference to the gaps that we're not getting the. We're not getting the full details of all the gaps between the groups. We're trying to do a bit of mental arithmetic here as we're watching the action on screen. So it does appear from the best of what I can work out that the leading D riders have a gap now of about 3 minutes to the main group that we can see on our screen here. So the gaps are certainly coming down, but we haven't quite seen where the A's are in a bit. So it'll be interesting to see if those A's and B's are still making the same kind of inroads as we've seen earlier.
So some names just to conjure with from the C group with about 3k to go. Well, that's 3 minutes to go. It's a little bit. It's going to be nip and tuck as to whether this can actually be got done. A few familiar names. C. Lally, could that be Conor Lally? We're going to see a report of this event on Sticky Bottle later on. Who knows? Fine cycling family with rich pedigree. And we'll watch with interest to see whether we get the full update on stickybottle.com. It's always great to watch.
Yeah, and we're hearing that the C's are now just a little over 2 kilometres behind the D group in terms of distance on the road. And as we heard earlier, the speeds are quite high here today, so that 2 kilometres doesn't actually translate into much time. It would be a much different story if we were going up the Zwift or something like that. 2 kilometres would be a huge chunk of time, but on these fast roads and around London city centre, it's a different story.
Well, I will remind you that there were 6 minutes at the start line between the leading between the entire D group and the C group. So that was a large chunk of change. It was the biggest gap between any of the groups on the road. Was the first group into action, followed by the second, which is the C group. And now it's considerably reduced. We've got 27 kilometres complete for the riders on screen at the moment. And this is the D group up front, so they've got still a long way to go.
Yeah, and this is one of the few drags on the course that we do have, and this is a sort of a really important part of the course on every lap, and that it's the one part where speeds will be slightly lower, power will have to be higher, and if groups can really maximize their effort across this, reduce the amount of time that they're moving the slowest, so to speak, then that's really where big chunks of time could be taken out of those groups in front of them, or chunks of time saved from the groups chasing them. So it's really important that the groups make a bigger effort on those drags. They can keep the speed up by working together on the flats and giving everybody a chance to recover, but on those drags everybody has to sort of do their bit and keep the power up.
The danger is that the most powerful rider, or the rider who can really generate huge watts for a short period of time, puts a bit of distance between himself or herself and the rest of the riders in that group. Just a quick update, there are now 2.7 kilometers between the leading riders on the road in this event and the top riders from the A group, who are scrabbling to get into contention here. We've got 25.5 kilometers completed, so we've still got about 20k to go. Can they be done? It looks to me as if it's certainly possible. What's remarkable, though, is that the A's have still not quite caught the B's. Still 300 metres between them.
And if anything, the gap is reversing. I think the B's are starting to pull away a little bit here, and perhaps the A's have just. It was a case of where would the elastic snap? Would the B's ease up first and the A's make the junction, or would the A's effort be lost and the B's start pulling away? So it's interesting to see here. From the information that we're getting, it seems that the B's have started to pull away a little bit.
That's remarkable, isn't it? That there was, is that a lack of cooperation among the A's? Are they starting to attack each other? Is it a case that, some riders, and just as we see it, Richard Barry appears to be on his own as he decided to go for glory here. Maybe just getting a little bit frustrated, the lack of progress, or did he have... Well, the alternative is he might have had a little Wi-Fi dropout and he's chasing back to his group. But I think, no, that Richard Barry has gone solo here.
It seems that he has gone solo, perhaps, a lack of cooperation. What we might have seen there is, a lot of the riders in the A group sort of looking around, recognising that Richard Barry is a strong Zwift competitor, has been up there in all the Cycling Ireland Zwift events, and perhaps trying to offload a lot of the work in catching the B group onto Richard Barry in an attempt to sort of... diminish his powers for the sprint to the finish, and that is a risky tactic, and that if it works, certainly you may well have hampered the strongest rider in the group, but if it doesn't work, then perhaps you never catch those riders in front, and you're also out of the chances of winning on the day. So it appears that if that has been the tactic that the A group has decided to play, that it might have backfired on today's case.
We're watching Richard Barry, the man who finished second in the Cycling Ireland Zwift League and who is racing to try and get across the gap between the fourth group on the road in this chase event. It is a handicap race. The leading, the Superstar A competitors started fully 10 minutes after the rest. I can tell you Richard Barry actually had time between the start of this race and between his own group leaving to text us and to say this is the longest 10-minute wait that he's ever faced in a Cycling Ireland Zwift race, and his frustration now means that he wants to get across the gap, and looks as if there's quite a big group just in front of him.
That might well be the B's just in front of him here, and this is really make or break situation for Richard Barry. Now the effort he's putting in here is it might well bring him across to this B group just in front, but if he doesn't make the junction, it's going to pretty much end his race for today. It does look like he might just make it across here, but if the road should happen to completely level off or start going downhill here, then Richard Barry could find himself in trouble quite quickly. And as the French might say, he's found himself in the chasse patate situation here, where he's stuck in the middle between the two groups. But luckily for him, it appears like he might just make the junction here.
The last 5 seconds can be the hardest 5 of all to get, and the A's, we understand, have been motivated. Perhaps they've been shaken into action by this attack by Richard Barry, and they're starting to get a little bit closer to Barry as Barry in turn gets on terms with the B's. Will he ride straight through to the front, or will he just try and catch his breath? And just a quick reminder, if you're watching this and you're unfamiliar with Zwift League racing, and indeed we are streaming this on various different platforms and channels, it is worth worth noting and worth reminding you that all of these riders are competing against each other. They're all riding on their home trainers at home, in the shed or out on the patio, or perhaps up in a spare room with fans blowing and windows open to try and keep themselves cool, because this is hot and heavy, very intense racing. We've got different groups on the road as well. And one other good suggestion might have been that we put the riders in different categories into different coloured jerseys. I'm not sure if that's possible. Maybe we'll look at it again. Great to have Rick Hanna along for the ride today. Thanks for your comments and your support as we come up to complete another lap. Just a kilometre left on this particular lap for this is the second of 3 laps of 11.8 kilometres. We had a 5.7 kilometre run to the beginning of the laps. We're all going to total just over 40 kilometres of racing today, and it's starting to get busy. And Richard Barry is just charging through the group as we see others using the power-ups to get back on terms with the Flying Corkman. He's in fighting form this morning, no doubt.
Yeah, he certainly is. Yeah, and it looks like the gap to the leading riders on the road is still about 3 minutes here, so it's probably too big of a gap for Richard Barry to close on his own. He'll need to get the assistance of the rest of the riders in this group, and if he puts in too big an effort here on the front, he runs the risk of sort of again find himself in that scenario where the other riders in the group start to look at him. They recognise the strength that he has, and they don't want to assist him in sort of riding away to victory. So a lot of pressure being heaped onto Richard Barry here to try and close this gap.
Quick reminder that this is not the front of the race. It's interesting to us, but it's starting to split up a little bit at the very front. We've got 1 or 2 riders who've stretched clear of the rest, and Korzeniak is one of the riders who's clear of the rest at the front of the bike race at the moment, amongst that D group, desperate to try and hold off in can they possibly get the glory this morning. Michael Garland, the visiting rider from Scotland, has been on or near the front throughout this event. Brian Laguerre is top Irish competitor. Tomasz Korzeniak, Olejniak is another rider. I'm really butchering that name. Apologies once more. But Dennis Vachtel, Robert Waters, Owen Marr, Katie Devon, all to the fore. But a few cracks starting to appear amongst that group up front.
There certainly is, but they're definitely working well together. We're inside the final 10 kilometres of today's race, and it's still over 2.5 minutes to the main A and B group now that the 2 groups have come together on the road. That's might be slightly worrying for Richard Barry in that he's made that huge effort to come across solo, but the rest of the A's have also made the junction. So certainly it's going to be a very tight finish here, and it looks like the D's at the moment they're still in with a shout of making it all the way to the finish line without being caught.
It's not done and dusted yet. It's going to be a terrific crescendo finish here, isn't it? The C's, we understand, are now 2 kilometres behind the leading riders in the race. The leading C riders behind the leading D riders by 2 kilometres. Now, what's the gap between the C's and the now merged B's and A group? We're given to understand that was coming down at a rate of knots. So this is all starting to come together nicely. Still a way to go. They're all having to put it in, and of course this is the period and the phase of the race where people will be least enthusiastic about putting the pressure on the pedals, because it's starting to hurt.
Yeah, it certainly is, but this is really where it matters. We can see the A and B group catching the C's here on our screen as we speak, but we're down to a group of roughly 11 riders leading in front with the D's, and everybody in between those leading 11 riders and this huge group of A, B's and C's that we can see on our screen now is most likely to get swept up by this huge chasing group. But it'll be, it's going to be so tight at the finish whether or not the leading D's can stay away, or whether these A, B's and C's that are now have come together on the road will be able to catch them. Only time will tell, I suppose.
So it's all starting to come together as we see those C riders, Lally, Nolan and the rest have just about made the junction. So leading A's, leading B's, leading C's, all one big pack, all one charging pack. How many of those C's are going to be able to hang on in here? Dylan Rafter is still amongst those, B rider in amongst that group of what we're going to call the favourites now. They're certainly the fastest group in the event right now. It's increased in size. Whether that's going to aid the pace or not, I'm not so sure. Gaffney is amongst those riders. Brian Geary from Tipperary, based in Dublin these days, he's been part of this Cycling Ireland Zwift League racing since its inception. And he's amongst those leaders frantically trying to get back into action. So the leading A, Bs and C riders, how far behind the Ds are they at this point? You'd have to fear for the chances of the Ds hanging on here, because while it is still an advantage, well, they're out of sight, but they're far from out of mind. They're a long way up the road, but is it far enough?
Well, I'm going to put my neck in the line here. I'm going to say that the Ds are going to stay away today. I think they've got a very good opportunity here. They've got 11 riders in front working well together, and certainly it's going to be exciting action. I'll put my money on the Ds staying away here. And what's going to be really interesting to see is, we've got this huge A, B, and C group that's come together now on the road. If they do happen to catch the Ds, it'll only be in the closing kilometers of the race, and what that means is we're going to most likely see a huge bunch sprint coming into the finish line, and who knows who could take out that sprint. While we might look towards the riders that have been up in the sprints in the A races previously, there could be riders in the Bs and C groups who have massive sprints that we're not quite aware of at the moment, but we're sure to find out in a very short time.
Just over 10 kilometres remaining in this Cycling Ireland Zwift Classic, the first of 5 one-day events. 3 of them are going to be pursuit events of this particular character and style. We've got 2 points races in amongst that as well, and this Australian handicap, this competitor pace event, this chase event has really ignited interest, hasn't it? It's been terrific fun and terrific entertainment so far today. Just a smidgen over 10 kilometres for these leading riders, including Katie Devon, who is the leading woman competitor. Also, there's a visiting rider in there, Debbie van den Berg from the Netherlands, who's riding with great ability. And they're fighting hard to get on terms and to stay out front indeed and maintain their advantage. Dennis Vachtel, Michael Garland, we've already mentioned. Owen Marr, one of the leading Irish riders in here. Brian Legear, not exactly sure, is that the full title? Sometimes the names on their Zwift profiles aren't indeed necessarily their actual name or their full name, but we'll just make an assumption, just read them out as they are at the moment. And the leading D riders, I can tell you, have a lead of around about a minute on of other D riders that were in the group earlier on. So these are the cream of the D group. They've managed to detach themselves from the rest of the Ds and put almost a minute into their into riders which are grouped. I mean, they're grouped based on their similar athletic ability. These are the riders in form and who are really able to lay out the watts today.
They certainly are, yeah. And just as we see that, those Ds at a minute gap have just been picked up by the A, B, and C group. So perhaps I was a bit early there in making my call, and that the gap is down to a minute now. So it is, and that's it's half there, and just in that short little period that we had since I put my neck out there, and the gap is now down to just around about a minute, if not under it, and the gap on the road is under a kilometre. So it's looking very much likely that the Ds they've just ran out of steam here as we come into the closing kilometres of the race, whereas the A, Bs and Cs have, as we see on our screen, have come together. It's a huge group chasing down the leading D riders now, and we know how well a big group can move when they really get up to speed.
Okay, most recent time gap given to us just a few moments ago, 1 minute and 2 seconds between the front of the race and this huge heaving mass charging group of superstars behind. That includes the very best of the A's, the very best of the B's are in there as well. I wouldn't be surprised if 1 or 2 C's have managed to hang on in that group, and they've got just around about 62 seconds, probably down to 60 since I started talking, and it is just a smidgen under a kilometre between them on the road. 36.2 kilometres, and the finish line will be reached at around about about 45.5 kilometers completed. Sometimes the graphics are a little bit out of kilter, but they'll see the finish flag, they'll see the kilometer to go banner, and it's going to be a while before they get there. But at this rate of progress, you certainly wouldn't bet against this group of favourites behind making the catch. But that's not going to prevent our D riders up front from desperately fighting to hold on. And with the glory of victory, it's something that's not often presented to riders in this category. So they race for category honours, of course, on a regular basis in league competition. But that's the great thing about handicap racing, isn't it? That this is the opportunity for these riders to really star, and they're grabbing their opportunity with both hands here today.
Yeah, it looks like we're just over 3 kilometers, roughly speaking, from the finish line. They've still got a gap of, by my calculation, around about 50 seconds at this point. So it's by no means certain in either way. But the D's have a great opportunity here to take the overall victory in today's race, and it's sort of reminding me now of one of the almost doomed to failure Tour de France breakaways that we see, and you're coming into the final kilometers and wondering, are they going to make it, are they going to get caught, and nobody really knows until you cross the line. It looks like it'll be right on the finish line before we get a real definitive answer on that one today.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it looks like a glorious, sweet and utterly futile gesture, the group out front attacking. But you know what? Sometimes they hang on, and that's what we've got today. They've been given enough rope, 10 minutes in actual fact, over the leading A riders, and they're going to do what they can to hold them off. Quick shout out for Team Ulster Chase Race Winter League, 1900 hours on Wednesday evening from cheers for your support, Rick, and congratulations to all of the organisers of all the different activities online that we've played host to, and we've witnessed indeed in recent months. It's been terrific fun, hugely entertaining, and more groups being hoovered up, and those are some interlopers, I think, in between the leading D's and the charging A group behind, who've been gathered back into the fold. They'll be spat out the back pretty quickly again as well, I think, judging by the pace of Fagan and indeed Barry and some of the others that are also starting to appear towards the head of affairs.
Yeah, and if we use Richard Barry as a reference, he had found himself as high up there as 12th place on the road with around about 40 seconds now to the leading D. So again, we're inside the last kilometre and a half, 2 kilometres before the finish here. So it really is still remaining so tight and very, very difficult to call either way. I'm going to stick with my guns here that the D's might just take it today, and I'm not sure if that's a call from the heart or a call from the head, but certainly it'd be nice to see the D's take this one.
So still a minute is what we understand between the leading D's and the A's behind, and the kilometres are starting to shrink away. They have a shot at it here, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I would not have bet on this possibility 2 kilometres ago, but we were just given the indication in the update from Zwift headquarters that it is now 1 minute gap between the front of the race and those charging behind. So continue to press on. If you're listening to us, any of the riders from the D group, it's still worth fighting for, and it's time to use that featherweight power up. Very few climbs on this course worth the mention, but this is just a little bit of a drag that's a little bit painful to say the least. But Korzeniak is very impressive, the kind of watts that he can put out on this drag.
Yeah, it looks like he might actually be pulling away here. He's up at 4.5 watts per kilo. The gap is starting to open up behind, and it's gone from 1 second gradually up to 2 seconds, and it does appear to be growing, and it is on that one drag that we have on today's course, and we can see the difference that just a slight incline like that can make when everybody's been on the rivet, as we say in cycling, for such a long time already. We're up at 58 minutes of racing action here so far for these leading Ds, and that is going to have its effect on the riders at this stage now, have been going so deep into the red for so long.
Very impressive stuff by Tomasz Korzeniak, the Polish rider, riding with Cycling Ireland in this event, and he's he's managed to establish a little bit of an advantage out front. The question is he going to maintain this push to the line? We're over 40 kilometres, so he's got about, just over 5 kilometres of this event left, and he's heading for glory today. But will he be able to hang on clear of the D riders, let alone the A's behind? These last time we heard, there was still about a minute, and
make it slightly less than that, or quite a significant chunk less than that. I have
less than a kilometre, less
place on the road now.
So yeah, we're very, very close to the conclusion of this event. We're just a little bit unsure of where the looks like the kite now, and here's the A group behind, and I think Korzeniak has a shot at holding them off for the glory. We've got to see the front of this race now. Is Korzeniak going to be able to hang on? We're within touching distance of this up front, and as we see the A group behind under the kite, a little bit of a distance to go, and this is we understand the front of the race as we go with 1 kilometre to go. So the graphic up front is just a little bit out of kilter. We're going to be 1 kilometre from the front now. Korzeniak has been hoovered up. This is the front of the race. The catch has been made. Beautiful handicapping. The A's stayed in contention. The D's had their shot at glory today, but it's going to be for the fast riders to duke it out for glory today.
Yeah, such a disappointment there for the D's. They're just caught right inside the final kilometre as we see the leading A's and potentially B's and C's also in this group coming in towards the sprint for the finish now.
So Barry up front, Anuel as well, Gardner, some of the names to conduit. Geary has got a shot at glory for the first time in a while. Sayward is in there as well. Vachtel is among the D riders who've been hoovered up. Barry's going for the glory. We're racing down the mall today. Various riders have got a power up to call on. Featherweight probably not the one you want. It's the aero helmets that will have the advantage. All about trying to time this one and put it on the line at exactly the right time. Noppen is overhauled as it's Wright, the English rider, who is the glory man today as he gets the win. And it's Wright, we understand, as we'll wait for full. Isaac Wright, I believe, is his name. Is he from Northern Ireland or is he from England? I think that might be an English flag for St. George. We wait for full confirmation of that. The riders are across the line. The race is complete. It's been an absolutely fabulous handicap event. We wait for full confirmation of the finishing order at the conclusion, but that one really came down to the wire. It had everyone surprised, but the catch made just in the nick of time.
Yeah, and certainly, if I have it right there, it seems like Nathan Keown might have been the first of the Irish riders across the finish line. We're seeing a slightly different result on our screen here now, but at the time of crossing the line, it looked like Nathan Keown might have been leading there in terms of Cycling Ireland's Zwift League.
So we wait for full confirmation. Yeah, slightly garbled graphic there as we try to understand exactly what the finishing order. There's just a little bit of a glitch in the system, and Christoph Olejniak has appeared on our screen. A little bit too often there for comfort, but I believe it was Isaac Wright that was the man who got his hands in the air in a virtual sense. Perhaps he did it in reality as well, and he was the first to cross the line. But Nathan Keown, the first of our Cycling Ireland riders, as we look, maybe we can catch up on what happened in the last few hundred meters to try and get a sense of how that one was played out. And everybody was just at the end of their tether, at the end of an hour of really tough racing. And who had the energy left to go for glory? Isaac Wright was still in there.
Yeah, and certainly, regardless of who happened to take the overall win in terms of the Cycling Ireland riders here, what we did see was riders up in the sprint at the finish who we haven't seen competing at the pointy end of sprints previously, and perhaps that's an indication that they saved their legs quite well throughout the race and left a lot of the work up to other riders, or perhaps it's just a show of who happens to be in good condition at the moment and was able to sustain such a high intensity for an hour of racing there. And I think today's race, if you ask the riders, probably was much more intense than racing we've seen previously.
I think the fact that everyone felt like they had a shot at a finishing position a bit higher than they're used to, or that they would often get in and a little bit more prominence as well. I mean, riders race in their own category in each week, but maybe don't get all the same level of attention. So the opportunity to race for hands up ahead of everyone else in a big event, and they're still coming in. They've been coming in for quite a while now. We're just going to try and pick up on exactly what happened in the finish line. Just to confirm, was Isaac right that got the victory? We're still trying to confirm the finishing order of the top 10, but no doubt about the man that got that success. And I think it's overall as a new innovation to Cycling Ireland, Zwift racing, Ronan, the chase format has been a roaring success today.
Yeah, I think I can sit back properly in my seat here now. I can come back from the edge of it. It was exciting stuff the whole way through, and as a special mention there as well for the D group riders who did survive out there right in front, right until the closing kilometre, only to be swallowed up by the chasing pack, and that'll be heartbreaking for them. But at the same time, it'll be inspiring for the next chase race that we have, and that they'll know that the opportunity is there to stay away had things gone slightly different today, or maybe perhaps if one or two more of the strongest D riders had been on the start line, it might have been a different story, and we might have just seen the A group run out of road in terms of trying to make the catch.
Yeah, if you want to check back at the Cycling Ireland website for full results, we'll have those inside the. It usually takes a couple of days for them to update when they work everything out. But quick shout out, I think, for Thomas Korzeniak, who was desperately unlucky, really. Well, not so much unlucky, but he will see it as being unfortunate that he didn't quite manage to hold off the pack. He made that bid for glory, and he was the final rider from the Ds to be hoovered up just over a kilometre remaining in the event. But it was Isaac Wright that got the win. Nathan Keown, who's well known to fans of Team Dan Morrissey, who was the leading Irish rider, and they'll be coming in for a while, but that's all we have for you this morning here from the Cycling Ireland Zwift Classic. We'll be back for the second of the events just a week from now, next Saturday morning, same time at 10 a.m. And it's going to be a points race format. They're always super entertaining as well. But from myself, Declan Quigley, and from Ronan McLaughlin and all the team, thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you again next week. Goodbye.